Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. I'm Paul Hunter, Artistic Director of Told by an Idiot, and this is a podcast where I talk to friends and colleagues delving into what made them the person they are today. Hello, and welcome. My guest this month has been a seminal figure in alternative British theatre for more than 30 years. The company he co-founded toured the world and inspired a generation of theatre makers. As a performer and director, he is equally at home on a motorbike in a quarry as he is on some of Britain's most prestigious stages. He has a true punk spirit and is a dear friend. Welcome, Mike Shepherd.
Oh, I think that might be the best introduction I've ever had.
Well, you can have that, Mike. That is from me to you. I think about these introductions, and I was trying to keep it brief because you don't want too much of an introduction, do you? But I'm glad you like it. It's lovely to see you. We normally meet in person. We're Zooming in this occasion. We might touch on how we both feel about Zoom, but not immediately. Before I ask what is my usual first question, I'm going to ask a difficult question. And if you can't answer it, it's fine. We might return to it. But obviously, I didn't mention the company that you co-founded, but it was and remains the glorious Kneehigh, who I've had the privilege of working with a few times, and such a joyous and extraordinary thing that company was. If you had to try and sum up the spirit of Kneehigh, what would that be?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? You've touched on something here because I am a very positive person, but I find making theatre quite often comes out of the opposite of that. So, you know, and some of the best theatre I've made. So, for example, Dead Dog in a Suitcase. You look at that and you go, "Well, I don't want to do that. It's all, you know, the blokes are all rogues and the women are prostitutes, and McHeath gets reprieved." And then when you delve into the knottiness of that, then, but we'll put it this way: I never went, this is Kneehigh, this is easy, this is what I want to do. Dead Dog in a Suitcase. This is the version of the Beggar's Opera. I know what I'm going to do. So quite often I don't know what to do. So I didn't know what to do. For some reason, and God knows why, I wanted to do theatre. My only experience of it was playing Oliver in St Austell Amateur Dramatic Society, which was terrible. It should have put anyone off for life. But then I was never allowed to go to drama school. I wasn't university material. My choices were the military or teachers training. So I ended up in Bulls Park College. Ever heard of it? No, of course you haven't. Bulls Park College. And I directed Sondheim's Sweeney Todd and also played 3 parts in it. And I've just always had to do it. And I have to say, I've never thought about it that much, but I started Kneehigh because I tried to get into the business. I did the whole thing in London. I had an agent, and it really didn't work for me. And I thought, I don't want to go into theatres. I don't want to play to theatre audiences. And you mentioned the word punk. It was so important to do something different. And I mean, there's more and more pressure, isn't there, as we make work that's going to work. And I kind of willfully immersed myself in stuff that really shouldn't work. I mean, I've mentioned Dead Dog in a Suitcase. That was almost impossible to sell. The number of theatres, and how many decades have we had now? We've got to attract a new audience, a new theatre audience. You know, we can't, there's not an audience for that. And I maintain, well, there is an audience for it. It's a Dead Dog in a Suitcase audience. And absolutely there is. But no, it wasn't your standard theatre audience. And Gemma Bodinus and Deborah Aden weren't your standard theatre producers, if you like, at Liverpool Everyman. They took risks with a joyful anarchy and celebrated not quite knowing what they were doing. So if I had to encapsulate Kneehigh, it was punk. We really had to enjoy ourselves. We trod all sorts of boundaries of otherness. My event of the year was the circus coming to town in St Austell, not Christmas, not my birthday as a kid. And I used to hang out in the menagerie and look at those kind of exotic people. And I absolutely am not an exotic person, but I would regret I've had a few. I wish I'd been an exotic person with a few more of those circus skills, actually. But it was that otherness. Just behind me is a picture of my mum who died recently, but she booked us into schools, 2 shows in the morning, 2 shows in the afternoon. And, you know, we were going from 6 in the morning to God knows what time. You know, we'd then get back and then we'd rehearse the shows for the public at night. And because we were rehearsing at night and we'd been very polite all day in schools, we were really impolite. We were rude. We were naughty. We were anarchic. A bit wild, a bit sexy.
Well, I think what you've just said is a fantastic kind of summing up, I think, of the Kneehigh spirit. The boundaries of otherness, anarchic joy, the naughtiness, all of these extraordinary things that, and we'll touch more on Dead Dog in a Suitcase as a show later on, because as you know, I was an enormous fan of that show. I think it was a brilliant piece of work, political and visceral and funny and hugely entertaining, but we'll come to that. But I want to take you back, if I may, to the Oliver you were mentioning in your younger days. And I'm interested, I often ask my guests this, what was obviously that was a very early exposure to performing. And you mentioned the circus coming to town. Was that was the circus your first taste of seeing live performance? Or was there other opportunities for you to see live stuff?
Not really as a child, other than my parents were kind of post-war, immediately after the war, they were very much Londoners. They'd had me and my sister. I was still only 1, and they basically came to Cornwall to reinvent themselves. But my mum, for some reason, not my sister, just used to take me back once a year. I had a granny with a sweet shop in Hammersmith, Resolve. And she used to take me to shows. So I remember seeing the Water Babies with Tank in the West End, Water, and Noddy and Big Ears. I can't say they were inspirations either.
But then obviously you were growing up in Cornwall, and were there any kind of opportunities within school to perform? Obviously you mentioned Oliver, which obviously was a thing.
There were, and I mean, I'm going to say this and get it out there. My God, how much damage the Tories have done. But you know, back in the day, so it's all pre-national curriculum, etc. You know, there was a whole drama department at County Hall. There were 3 drama advisors. There were amazing men like Jerry Finch, who was also the fencing captain. He had long black ringlets. Fencing captain of Cornwall, long black ringlets. He played the piano like a dream, and he sung opera. And he was on the Camborne sort of college campus with a lot of ruffy old kids in a Nissen hut, and you came in and he'd be cooking, he'd be singing, he'd be a total inspiration. And I remember doing 2 things. I remember doing the Ordinalia at Piran Round when I was 15, and I remember us doing Brecht, Grusha, what's
Caucasian Chalk Circle?
Caucasian Chalk Circle, in the moat at Pendennis Castle. So there was this kind of outdoor theatre as well, but these inspirational figures that, of course, all then got cut. And I mean, the last thing anybody wants anywhere on any staff now is an inspirational figure.
But you also mentioned
first strings.
you mentioned in your introduction that in a sense, even if that interest had been piqued in a variety of ways, from Brecht to the circus or whatever, and inspirational people, that the choices weren't there necessarily for you to go to drama school and university wasn't. And you talked about the military or teaching. Can I just ask what made you choose between the two? Why you didn't go down the military option?
Oh, then no way. No, I didn't buy into that. No, oh my God, yeah. And I kind of defiantly say I wasn't a hippie, and then I see pictures of me circa 1970 with headband. I thought, of course, I was a hippie. But we were all part of the peace movement, you know. And it was a hero was Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, Dylan, Lennon, that whole thing, and we so fervently believed that we were going to change the world, and I think we were changing the world. So yeah, there's no way I'm going in the military, mate.
No, I couldn't imagine you, unless we did a really fun production of The Charge of the Light Brigade and you played one of those doddery old generals. We must chat about that. But so, however, you embark on a teaching a career, as you said, and you're and how long were you actually working as a teacher for?
I was very lucky because to work as an artist at that time, you could always find someone to live in London and in Cornwall. And I started off, my first job was Archway Comprehensive. And I did that for a couple of years. That was tough, but rewarding as well. Kind of on the perimeter of the school grounds, again in a Nissen hut. So I'd got the inspiration, if you like, of Jerry Finch. And I repainted the place because it was horrible. I put music into it. I showed films. I got a baby bedding and cooked delicious snacks. And then all of the streets were corrugated because the housing had been cleared for rehousing. So we went out and we did a graffiti project. I mean, you wouldn't be allowed out now. And then graffiti project with a bit of posing in front of it, which then became a bit of dance. And I had a Polaroid camera as well. And then we were kind of away. And I think I learned then about what I think is often negated is that you need stuff, the conditions of creativity. So I'm here at the Barns, surrounded by things. And you know, you need colour, you need a bit of fresh air, you need a tasty snack, you need you know, you need things to build things and to inspire. I do anyway. I'm not one of those people that can sit in a vacuum and have a brilliant idea. But I probably taught in London for 3-4 years whilst doing other things. I sort of then went, you could turn up if you fancied teaching, you could turn up at the local office and just teach for a day. And then I did the most perfect job in Cornwall. I kind of got headhunted by a headmaster in Mevagissey, where I'm pretty much from. And he said, "Oh, I want you to come to the primary school. But I don't want you to have your own class. I want you to take over the schoolhouse," which he previously lived in. So the schoolhouse still had his dog. It had a kitchen with an Aga. It had a garden. And he basically said, do what you want. So I had, you know, I'd be telling the story of the gingerbread man to infants and cooking them at the same time. We created history projects which were to do with the last 100 years. So we did sort of tea and biscuits and chats with grandparents. We went to Heligan, which was this lost kind of paradise. So we'd be there all day. We'd be building dens, doing drama, doing poetry, bit of maths, traffic sensors. I used to take kids out in fishing boats. It was,
but all of what you describe, in a sense, when you talk about the school in Archway and then the school in Mevagissey, and and I look at the Barns where I've had the pleasure and joy to rehearse and spend time with you, all feels kind of like almost the genesis and principles of Kneehigh, the idea of welcoming and nurturing and holding people together. That's clearly something that obviously is in you. But even though you weren't in the Kneehigh, you hadn't created that yet, it felt like all the principles were in place. Is that fair enough to say?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. And again, to do with those conditions of creativity, and I mean, we all aspire to be generous, you know. I mean, round here, you'll probably remember it. There's a wall. Yeah, I try to avoid the color black here. Colour black. There is a red wall. And on that wall, it says generosity, wonder, play, irreverence, anarchy, and generosity is the top word. The top word. I think we've all got to, you know, in our everyday lives, try to be generous, which is a challenge.
And also, I think that, which I always think of Kneehigh, and it's obviously something that we place a huge importance on at Told by Nillians. I think that generosity in the making of something, in the playing of something, and in the sharing of something with an audience. I always feel those things were so central to the Kneehigh kind of values. But how did Kneehigh come about? How did you actually get together and then do that first piece of theatre?
I certainly wasn't looking for through a Spotlight magazine, but I was looking for people that were interesting. So it's funny enough, I've just done a little mini festival here at the Barns where there's been a Christmas show for local children. There's been an amazing singing group. There's been Anna Maria Murphy with her unbelievable exaggerated stories. There's been Caroline Ada doing a Nancy, and there's been somebody called Dave Min doing his one-person Christmas carol. Well, Dave Min was one of the first Kneehigh people, and that came about by, I was walking around Tesco's and I was going, I wonder who, there's all this witty, slightly naughty sign writing advertising the latest cheeses or whatever with little cartoons, and I thought, who's writing that? So I was in the store to meet him, and we sort of became great mates. And then Charlie Barnaker was a local farmer and just a natural actor. And yeah, he came for, I don't know why I keep mentioning St Austell Amateur Dramatic Society, because it certainly was an inspiration, but he clearly was really, really competent. So he became a brilliant straight man. And the first thing we did was Mac Frisch's Fire Raisers.
Yes, a great play. I've been in that. It's a great play.
Yeah. So Charlie Barnaker at Biederman, who's the man who's absolutely paranoid that his business is threatened and his household by the arsonists. And then I was Eisenring, who was one of the arsonists. So that felt like the perfect beginning for Kneehigh.
And where were you playing? Where did the show play?
Well, that funnily enough did play indoors in village halls and things, but the next show was The Adventures of Awful Knorful, about the world's greatest stuntman. With a remarkably fit chap who's just come back from Australia, and he's got to be in his mid-60s, but he's still running the cliffs. He was the world veteran triathlete champion, a guy called John Mergler, and he was incredibly fit. And we'd used to do these preposterous, I was going to say they looked highly dangerous, but they were bloody dangerous. These stunts off the cliff, homemade off the harbours. You said homemade pyrotechnics, and then we'd bring people, get someone to put up a tent and seat people on straw bales for the evening. That first show and the very first performance, I got arrested at the end of it. PC Burstow was at the show was in the round with 4 exits, and every time I came off, PC Burstow went, "Oi!" and would chase me around. I managed to keep going to the end of the show, even entering when I wasn't supposed to be on. And then, yeah, he put me in a headlock. He put me on my back and marched me off because apparently I didn't have a performance license.
That makes me think, that is so brilliant. That makes me think of two things. It makes me think of one of my favourite Danny Kaye films, is a film that ends with him being chased by the baddies and the police in a theatre, and he ends up on stage in an opera. And as singing the tune of the opera, he improvises to the police, "They're coming to get me, they're coming to get me." So I can't remember what it's called, but the thought of you being
in a headlock. Jester, is it? No,
no, it's, I don't know what, might be the one when he's got his dead. Anyway, we'll find that out. We can let our listeners know to search that up. But and also, I have to say, it's not the first time that you've been accosted by people. I'm thinking much further down the line in Kneehigh, when you were accosted by, you told the story of being accosted by what sounded like an old brigadier in Stratford for what you had, what he perceived you were doing to Shakespeare. But we'll come to that later. I suppose my next thought. So you get going, and you're performing indoors, outdoors. I just wonder what the influence of Footsbarn was for you, because obviously they came slightly before you, didn't they? Can you talk a bit about that?
Footsbarn were a huge inspiration. Again, you know, that alternative lifestyle, that stepping beyond. They put on a fantastic event, and then they were still like Comedia, where they'd still rock up on a harbour with a simple stage, and the work was bloody funny and physical. Certainly in those early days, that they were a huge inspiration. And also, I remember when they went on Southwest Television, because they left sort of 2 years before Kneehigh started, and they tore their Southwest Arts grant check in half, and then they just set off across Europe. You know, they ended up in Portugal, where they were singing for their supper, and then they were adopted by France, where, I mean, some sort of Footsbarn still exists, but that young Footsbarn they were fantastic, brilliant, daring work. Yeah, so huge inspiration.
It's important, isn't it, when we get often asked about this, and the influence that people have on what you do, and I suppose the equivalent, Footsbarn view, the equivalent for us was Complicity, which I've talked about many times. But you know, that influence, doing stuff that we haven't seen before, and John Wright introducing us to that. But obviously Kneehigh went from strength to strength, and I'd like to, obviously now I think about when we first met, because it was when you were doing a wonderful Nick Dark play, The Riot, at the National Theatre, and then from my agent I said, oh, you got an audition to meet Mike Shepherd at the National with Kneehigh. And of course I'd heard of Kneehigh and King of Prussia at Donmar, and you know, so I knew who you were, and I remember meeting you, and I felt like we clicked and everything. Then of course obviously you didn't offer me the job, which I absolutely, fair enough, understand. But the journey after, I remember coming to see the show and enjoying it very much, and Emma was in it. Emma Rice was in the production, I think, yeah, amongst with some other brilliant performers. And then brilliantly, you did remember me, and then a couple of years later, you were reviving the wonderful Red Shoes, Emma's first big main show directed for Kneehigh, and you asked me would I be interested, and of course I was, and I jumped on a train from London, and you said come to the Barns, and I'd never travelled south of Bristol, so as we got further south and we got past Plymouth, I thought, blimey, where am I going? And then you picked me up in St Austell, and you drove me to this place, the Barns, and I think I was a bit open. I was open-mouthed, and obviously there was this extraordinary place. And then we chatted, and you and Emma said, let's go to the pub for lunch. We walked round the back of the Barns, and there was the ocean. And I think I said to you, we've just been rehearsing under a flyover in Westbourne Grove. So to see this extraordinary home that you had nurtured and created, and that was my first experience of working with you, and which was glorious. But I wonder, at what point did it become clear that Emma was wanting to make that transition into directing? Because she was such a great performer as well. But Was Kneehigh, was Red Shoes the tipping point for her?
No,
or?
she came in and she'd got a brilliant kind of training. She'd learned from Mike Alfred's. She had been part of Alibi, so had done a lot of that school's work and storytelling work, and had a slightly traumatic time, I believe, in Gardenicha in Poland, but had really learned from that as well. And I mean, she describes it where she came, and she described us as kind of gypsies sat around a fire and this, that, and the other. And it was very much anything goes. And she definitely added real rigor in terms of the physicality, not the physicality so much, but the emotional depth of work. And she was, I'm sure she won't mind me saying this. I'm going to see her later. We're going to the Lucky Chance in Frome, but she was really bossy. And me and Bill, the great Bill were running the company at the time. Oh God, she's got to direct. So we were always looking for other people to direct. And the first thing she directed, and that was brilliant. It was before the Red Shoes. It was a version of The Changeling called The Itch, and we were becoming a little kind of uncomfortable. The outdoor work, we suddenly realised that we were playing to fairly wealthy audiences with their picnic hampers, coming for this that bloody word that gets overused, this quirky theatre company that is delightful. And then suddenly they're coming along and there's this show called The Itch where, you know, one of the greatest villains of all time, De Flores, they're having sex up against the crucifix while stabbing each other to death. That got rid of that audience. and then came the Red Shoes, but she's was quite clearly a really brilliant natural director. I loved her performances. If she was part of this Zoom, she would do herself down as an actor, but I think she just had a brilliant clarity and simplicity. And
I totally agree, Mike. I totally agree. My memories of seeing Emma in shows was exactly that. I thought she was wonderfully playful and in a great energy, and as you say, a sort of simplicity. But then obviously once I'd kind of connected and we'd become pals, I kind of, you know, there was such an extraordinary period for the company, wasn't there? I mean, both here and internationally, all over the place, and a world of extraordinary shows. Many listeners will know, from Tristan and Isolde to one of my favourites, the Bacchae, which I adored, and that kind of, you know, it just felt like being in an audience around that time where in some ways it felt more like people who followed a band. You know, the energy and passion that people have for music sometimes doesn't always translate to theatre, but whenever I was seeing that a lot of your shows, that's what I felt in the audience. It was like, oh, the next album had come out, or the next kind of, and I think that's for me what it felt like. What does it felt like when you were, you know, obviously you toured internationally before, but did it feel like were you conscious that you were in quite a special period for the company that I'm referring to, or does it just, you know, the show followed show sort of thing?
No, it was definitely a special time. And my God, in 2023, looking back, you go, oh my God, we were blessed. You know, there was Cymbeline in Colombia and Brazil at the same time as Rapunzel in New York, at the same time as Brief Encounter in the West End, at the same time as Blast in Cornish Village Halls. That feels incomprehensible now to, you know, to try and understand that. But
no, I'm sure, and it, as you say, sometimes the stars align in such a way with things that you don't want to think about it too much, but it does become a special time. At this point in the podcast, it's time to go to our Ask an Idiot question. So let's see what a listener wants to ask Mike this episode.
Hi Mike, my name is Harry and I'd like to ask, if there's one piece of advice you could go back and give your younger self, what would it be?
Oh, good question, Harry.
One piece of advice. That's hard, Harry, for me, because I'm not a great believer in advice. I'm not sure how much um, I've always wanted to work instinctively. I've always listened to other people, for example, the wonderful John Wright, and learned from them. But the advice to my younger self would be, keep arrogance. And arrogance is a bad word, isn't it? Oh, he's an arrogant so and so. But arrogance means for me as well a real belief, because I think, particularly in the theatre world or the arts now, there is so much pressure. So my advice would be, stay arrogant. Don't ever judge an idea. Don't concern yourself whether an idea is good, bad, or indifferent. Take that idea for a hop, skip, and a jump. But that's not giving advice to myself, because that's what I did. So
well, I think it's great advice. It's really on the nail, I think. So, Mike, I'd like to come now to where we started. In a way, you touched on a glorious show, Dead Dog in a Suitcase, with collaboration with the wonderful Carl Gross, who you worked with for many years, and obviously so we at the Idiots. And we had the good fortune at that time, when you just opened it, to be working together with the brilliant Joe Wright on his Pan movie. So we were hanging out that glorious summer in some field in Bedford, and you just opened. I remember you came to the shoot and to the set, and you showed me these images, and I thought, wow, it looks amazing. And then I finally got to see it on a couple of occasions, and I just thought it was genuinely such a brilliant fusion of things. That's what struck me, and I love the fierce politics of the piece as well. But as I said, at the same time, aligned with real wild entertainment, and all mixed together. And you often talk about, which you said earlier, which I really like, is not necessarily knowing what something's going to be or how you're going to do it, but that piece, which again toured globally, how much of that was also, I suppose what I'm saying is, how much of that was about the combination of personality? Because you had the great Charles Hazelwood, of course. So how much of that was about the people that were around you, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, you build brilliant creative teams. I love a creative team around me, and the different eras of Kneehigh. You've mentioned Emma, there's Bill Mitchell. You mentioned Nick Dark, and this era with Carl, who actually came to the company initially as an apprentice, and is another brilliant performer, but is a fantastic writer. So a combination of Carl, Charlie Hazelwood, Etta Murphy, I love working with, from Matthew Bourne. She was sort of just sat on your shoulder, and you'd be rehearsing something, you'd be going, well, that's not very good, that bit, is it, Mike? And I said, no, got any ideas? No, not in the moment. And we were just all the time trying to make things better. And then Sarah Wright with the puppetry.
Yeah.
I'd mentioned before, things often come from adversity, but that piece, I go, okay, so what is it about this piece that does interest me? And it was to do with the politics, and it was to do with John Gay and his furious sort of reaction to the ruling classes and the aristocratic masses going to Italian opera and swung back. So he went, right, I'm going to take the songs of the street from the beggars and make this beggars opera. So it was sort of profoundly political and having a go at everybody, really. And Punch and Judy, all our background with Pulcinello and Commedia, and that was clearly on the streets at the time. Incidentally, I've just been performing Punch and Judy with Sarah Wright for local audiences and thinking, oh my God, this is probably really inappropriate. Throw the baby out the window, whacking each other. But somehow that kind of, the frustration we have all got at the moment with what's going on and our inability to do anything about it, that kind of anarchy, that kind of revolution. So it comes back to punk again. And all those things were in it for me with Dead Dog. But
I suppose, I mean, that's as I said, I saw it a couple of times and adored it, and then for me, and not that you thought it like this, but it felt like it began a kind of trilogy of shows, followed by the Tin Drum and Ubu, both of which I adored. And this kind of, it almost felt like they sat together as a kind of mini body of work that I found so alive and so dynamic, and also very prescient. It felt like they're quite timely in a way, which of course you can't plan for. But my feeling, and bringing my kids and Sarah Jane, Dexter and Elsie, to see Uber at Christmas in Shoreditch Town Hall, and Dexter said, "Dad, this is great," and he's not an avid theatre goer. He'd rather watch the football, of course, but he clearly loved that, and I think that it did push those things. And then I think about more recently, we get together, we chat all the time, and we see each other. I mean, mutual pals and all that kind of stuff, and coming down to the Barns to work with you for a week was such a joy when you were developing your Calvino thing. And I hope I'm allowed to mention the beginnings of an idea around Grimaldi that you're cooking up, and I think that also sounds, for me, brilliantly commedia, the notion of where that sits somehow, both those ideas, but especially Grimaldi. And I was reminded before we started talking of a brilliant quote by Jacques Lecoq. I think he describes commedia the best I've heard, where he says, "Commedia contains all the essentials of life. Trying to eat, trying to procreate, and trying desperately to avoid death."
Yeah.
And I think that kind of captures it. And I think I look forward to whatever your journey is with the Grimaldi, because I think I know it's been around for a while, and it's a perfect project. Mike, as we draw to a close, I always end by asking my guests 7 rapid fire questions.
Sure.
You say the first thing that comes into your head. Here we go. Tony Benn or Tony Blair?
Tony Benn.
The next question is a fantasy question. 5 wickets at Lords or the winning goal for Plymouth Argyle in the Cup final?
5 wickets at Lords.
Motorbike or camper van?
Motorbike.
Tom Waits or Bob Dylan?
Tom Waits.
Hesitate or demonstrate?
Hesitate.
Cheese fondue or cheese souffle?
What's the first one? Fondue or souffle?
Fondue or souffle?
Souffle, I think.
Tilda Swinton or Juliette Binoche?
Tilda Swinton.
Mike, it's been an absolute joy, and people are going to be so pleased to enjoy hearing you talk so passionately about something you've done so brilliantly and continue to do so brilliantly. So thank you for sharing your time, and we'll get together and have one of our regular beers very soon.
Brilliant.
So, cheers, Paul. I'm Paul. Cheers, Mike. See you later. Take care. Cheers, mate.
Bye.
Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this idiot podcast, please spread the word